All right, everybody. Thank you for hanging out with us on First and Pod in the offseason. Danny Parkins, Andrew Fillipponi. We'll be going down to one a week. We will not be doing every team, and there are no games, but we will be doing the biggest stories in the NFL. And of course, the biggest story is the tragedy that happened at the end of the Chiefs Super Bowl parade. And this hits very close to home, given how much of my family and friends are there. And I worked there for 7 years, and both Poni and I, one of our best friends, Nick Wright, was there. And so we'll talk about that more at length. And of course, our thoughts are with everyone who's affected, people who are still in the hospital, and Lisa Lopez Galvin, the deceased radio host and personality in Kansas City, and her family. But we will share thoughts on that at length at the end of the podcast. But we wanted to kind of begin with full football, especially because the biggest story of the offseason seems to be right here in Chicago with what the Bears are going to do with the number 1 overall pick in Caleb Williams. But Poni, it's like the content gods have said, First and Pod will stay relevant, will stay A1, will stay front and center, because I cannot have ESPN on or Fox Sports 1 on without the hypothetical Justin Fields to Pittsburgh. Adam Schefter says Mike Tomlin loves Justin Fields. They even debated this week whether or not your Pittsburgh Steelers would be a Super Bowl contender with Justin Fields. Is this your A story of the offseason, Justin Fields?
It absolutely is. So let's just for a second, I want to echo what you said about what happened in Kansas City. And we are definitely going to spend some time on this on today's podcast. If you're listening to this in Kansas City on one of our terrestrial affiliates, we'll definitely carve out a lot of time to give some thoughts on everything that went on there. I am in off-season mode. I have a beer next to me as a celebratory. We made it to the end of the regular season. And I also was going to stay dressed up for this. I wore a nicer shirt. I had a meeting at work today. And has this ever happened to you with either one of your sons? Diaper off, bath going, baby naked on me, immediately peed all over my shirt.
Of course.
Down my shirt. It was not like a tinkle. It was just a full-fledged adult pee. Soaked both shirts. Dress shirt, undershirt underneath it. So I had to shower, and I basically just put my pajamas on after that for today's podcast. So that's the state of mind I'm in going into this.
Well, with boys, when you're changing the diaper, you got to be careful of the upshot.
Yeah. Did that happen to you?
It has. It has. Yeah. You got to, that it makes you be very fast. It's like a pit crew.
Yeah. I was just kind of waltzing into the bathroom. It had never happened to me before. So I was taking my sweet ass time. Definitely. Yeah. I'll own that one.
Let your guard down.
So this all started, you're right, with Schefter. Because when Schefter said that about Tomlin, it's one thing. I've come on here, this show, and I've told you how much Tomlin loved Justin Fields, and that the Steelers would have picked him first in that draft if they had the number 1 pick. They had him ranked as the best quarterback in that draft. They had a Trevor Lawrence, Trey Lance, Zach Wilson, etc. And I honestly believe if Roethlisberger had not called their bluff when they said, we're going to make you take a pay cut, I think there was a big part of the Steelers brass that thought he would say, I'm not playing for less. I'll retire. I think Mike Tomlin had his fingers crossed that Ben was going to walk away, and they were going to use that draft pick or trade. They were going to have to trade up to get Fields, but I think they would have done it. That's how much they loved him coming out of college. And our Steelers listeners and Pittsburgh fans know this who are listening to the podcast. They rely on their pre-draft scouting reports so much when it comes to moves they make in free agency and trades. They said that about Minkah Fitzpatrick. They say that about just about every crop of free agents they sign, what they thought of the player when they met with them at pro days and in Indianapolis and things like that. So that's where we start this conversation, that I think the Steelers are comfortable with Kenny Pickett, but there's somebody available who the coach loves, and the coach tends to get his way. Tomlin really runs the organization. If he wants something badly, he usually gets it, like when he wanted Brian Flores on the staff, even though Flores was suing the NFL. So that's kind of the entry point or preamble into the conversation that we're going to have. That's the Steelers' backstory and why
Okay.
this might make sense.
So normally it's like my time to give an opinion, but I'm going to ask you a follow-up question before I do. Do they like him enough to give up the 20th pick?
No, absolutely not. That won't happen.
What if it's Fields and a third?
They've only traded their first round pick one time in the last 50 years since the 60s, and that was for Minka. This is a quarterback that only has 1 year guaranteed on his contract. And there's the question of, like, if you do that, you have to immediately give him the 5th-year option. You have to. Like, you can't trade and give up that much, even if you're getting a third back.
No, I mean, you're
roll the dice.
If you trade for Justin Fields, you're doing that anyway, buddy.
I'm not sure about that.
I am. I mean, dude, a second round pick is a lot to give up for a quarterback.
So I'm happy that we're having this conversation because you start with the first and then you go to the second. The question I was going to ask you is, how sure are we that there's going to be a decent number of suitors for Fields?
I honestly have been surprised by how convinced the national people seem to be that there's going to be a bunch of suitors for him.
Well, and they keep saying that.
They do.
But other than the Steelers, has another team been linked to Fields?
No. A lot of people are connecting the dots in Atlanta.
I don't see it now.
No, I know. But I'm just saying a lot of people are connecting the dots in Atlanta because Ryan Pace is there, in a high-ranking personnel role. He drafted him, and he's from Atlanta. And Fields in a dome on a fast track with Bijan Robinson does feel like it could be a recipe to have the number one rushing attack in the NFL, which he had in Chicago, by the way. They didn't finish number one this year.
But that feels too much to me like doing what they did with the coach that's now the Steelers offensive coordinator. You're going to go get Justin Fields and you're going to have like an Arthur Smith style offense with, I will admit, someone who I think is better than Marcus Mariota. But to me, they tried that type of offensive philosophy and it didn't work. Mike Florio came on my show. He does once a week and said that someone in the Cousins camp at the Super Bowl said to him, the Falcons for Cousins. And given Zach Robinson's background and Raheem Morris and the fact that they just had Matthew Stafford in LA, that would actually make more sense to me with the weapons that they have than Fields. Now, that would mean Minnesota would need a quarterback, but would the Bears trade in division with Minnesota? They probably would if they're desperate, the highest bidder, but still.
Yeah, I think you go to the highest bidder, and that would be unbelievable drama. We've seen NFC North trades before. It would not be unprecedented. Obviously,
does Kevin O'Connell strike you as a guy that wants to hitch his wagon to Justin Fields? Me neither.
No.
The top 3 teams in the draft. We know the Bears are spoken for. Washington and New England. Would they rather trade for Justin Fields than use those picks on a quarterback? I don't think so. It's like,
what about the Giants?
What do they do with the Daniel Jones contract?
Sunk cost.
Then you're investing. If you pick up the 5th-year option, what's Fields making this year? Close to $10 million?
Less. But yeah.
Is it less? Okay,
yeah,
so like
a little less. Exactly.
So you've got
I think it's like 8.
So Spencer could look this up too. So you'd have Daniel Jones on your team making more than $30 million as a backup to Justin Fields. And you're giving up a top draft pick to get him too. I don't see that because I think
his cap hit's only $6 million this year.
I think Brian Dable still, against all odds, I think Dable still believes in Daniel Jones. They believed in him enough to give him an extension. Then he got hurt last year, and their offensive line was terrible.
So Ryan Poles, the Bears general manager, is very good at playing the media. He's very accessible to the national guys. He's pretty clearly like their source on some things. We used to be joking about how often he would talk to Peter King. He's done stuff with Schefter. He's done stuff with Rappaport. It's almost like he digs it. Like he's not like talking on the record a ton to them. He did to Peter King a little bit, but he's very clearly playing that game of creating the appearance of leverage. The reason why am interested in like what the Bears would have to attach to get to 20 is because their biggest issues on offense were Fields' limitations, a number 2 wide receiver, like a legitimate number 2 guy in the passing game other than DJ Moore, and center. And the kid from Oregon, Jackson Powers Johnson, 20 might be a smidge high, but maybe not. Everybody loves him. Almost everybody seemed to have a first-round grade on him. He crushed it at the Senior Bowl. If they could go Caleb, Malik Neighbors, or Rome Odunze, whichever one is there at 9, if either is there at 9, and Powers Johnson at the back end of the first round, check. They'll go into next year thinking they can win double-digit games. So I do think that the Bears might be willing to attach a draft pick to Fields to get back into range to take the kid from Oregon. So I think that when you talk about acquiring Fields, I do think that there's a potential pot sweetener that Ryan Poles would be willing to attach to it.
I'm going to say this for our First and Pod audience, but you can take it and use it on your show on 670 The Score too. There is a better chance that the Bears keep Fields and trade the number 1 pick than there is the Steelers will give up the 20th pick for Fields, even with some kind of day 2 pick attached to it this year or next year. You can take that to the bank. That is a guarantee. The owner will not let them do that. The only way the owner, I think, gets convinced to demote Kenny Pickett to backup and not even have it a competition is if he feels like the coach is so convinced of the player that he's willing to vouch for him and the acquisition cost is not exorbitant. They feel like they built Super Bowl champions through the draft. That has always been their MO. Only
well,
one
if they were
time
going to take
trade
Fields
pick.
1, they were going to have to give up a first to move up to get him.
I'm not sure about that. Based on where did Fields get picked?
11.
So 24 to 11.
The Bears had to give up a first to move up from 20 to 11.
Yeah.
They absolutely would have.
Well, let me ask you this question. You're saying it's who was the 12th pick?
Now, listen, obviously he was much more valuable than.
No, but I'm saying like.
Dude, you know who the 12th pick in that draft was?
Let me hear it.
Micah Parsons.
Yeah, but I'm saying Dallas wasn't going to pick somebody at 12 who was a quarterback. So going to, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, but.
I understand, but he was also more valuable than obviously because you had the whole rookie contract. How about this though? Do you believe? Because I know. We both like Fields, even though now I've been painted as a Fields hater because I've advocated.
Yes, because you wore a Caleb Williams jersey on radio, and I loved that stunt, by the way.
Thank you. I like Justin. He's a great guy. He's an 11 out of 10 leader. He's one of the 3 best athletes at the position at quarterback. He's got a cannon for an arm, and he was not given continuity and a chance to succeed here. But he's got some of his own issues. He's not an anticipatory thrower. He's not great throwing between the hash marks, and he takes way too many sacks. And because of his style of play, that leads to a pretty high injury risk. I thought the question of are the Steelers a Super Bowl contender with Justin Fields was ridiculous.
Of course it is. Yeah, they're not. There's a team in their conference that has gone to an AFC championship game every year. Patrick Mahomes has been their starting quarterback, and they just became the first team to win back-to-back Super Bowls in 20 years. So no, they're not. They could add,
and even in the division, he has basically no shot at being better than Lamar or Burrow ever. And then there's Deshaun Watson.
Well, I was going to ask you about the Lamar thing because you've watched Justin Fields play every game, and you're someone I think who feels like there was a lot of square peg, round hole coaching that went on.
There was, and he's obviously the same caliber of runner as him. He's just
You don't think he has a better arm?
He has a stronger arm.
Does he have a better deep ball?
Yes. But the using his legs to set up the throw, he got much better at it the second half of this season. So he definitely flashed it, but it has not been consistent. Like the Lamar play to score against the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game, that has not been a consistent thing for Fields. And he's never done anything like he has done in terms of 67% completion or 36 passing touchdowns. He's never flashed that degree of a ceiling as a passer.
Okay, so the Pittsburgh people in our audience are going to love what I'm going to do next. I'm going to give you an NFL quarterback right now and tell me if you think Justin Fields' ceiling is above the player that I'm about to give you, okay?
All right.
Tua.
Yeah. His ceiling?
Yep.
Yeah, because I mean, if he becomes a good passer, he's just more stable. He's a brick house of a man, but he just hasn't been able to. He has to run, dude. He has to run.
And I think in Arthur Smith's offense, he would.
Yes.
I don't think there's any question about that. Dak Prescott.
I mean, I would have said yes. This season, I don't think Justin Fields will ever throw for 4,500 yards like Dak did.
Well, Dak Prescott's never going to run for 1,000 yards and maybe 15 touchdowns.
But the problem with that is if you're relying on that for his ceiling, you're talking about Justin Fields for his 20s, which is still 5 more years. But you know what I mean? That ends. You lose a tenth of a time in your 40-yard dash. It's a problem.
I got 2 more for you. Jalen Hurts.
I mean, listen, when the Bears lost to the Eagles last year, I said if you flipped the quarterbacks, I thought that Fields was better than Hurts. So, yeah.
Trevor Lawrence.
No.
And you're down on Trevor Lawrence.
I think Trevor Lawrence of those 4 is the most naturally talented thrower of the football by far.
I lied. 1 more. Brock Purdy.
Yes. Come on.
Okay.
Dude, his ceiling is incredibly high. It's incredibly high. But this will be his 3rd NFL offense in 4 years. And he's about to get more expensive. So then it gets tougher to build a team around him. So it's just the NFL isn't fair. He's very good. He's very talented. He's an incredibly hard worker. His teammates love him. He might be that guy that ends up needing to be talked about like Geno Smith, where he needs to go somewhere and have some continuity and learn the offense for a little bit behind the scenes. And then when he comes in, he gets his chance. That's obviously not going to be this stop. He's going to be traded for and he's going to be a starter, but he's about to get expensive. So you're going to need to have a team that's really patient, not because he can't do it, but just because it's going to take a little bit to build the right team around his skill set.
I'm going to make a prediction, and you tell me for your Bears fans and for the Bears people listening how this will go over. I'm not saying this is necessarily to the Steelers. I think Justin Fields is going to get traded for what starts as a 3rd-round pick. And depending on the conditions that are put on it, how he plays, how many games he plays, what his numbers are, it'll move up to a 2nd-round pick. And then I think there will probably also be like maybe a 4th or 5th round pick the following season that gets thrown in there. I think
Bears fans will be underwhelmed. They'll be underwhelmed. They'll say Sam Darnold was traded for a 2nd, a 4th, and a 6th, and guys like Rappaport, Schefter, Glazer have said that there's absolutely going to be a robust market and that even a potential first was there. What I've been saying is if it's a first round pick, I think it's a future first. I'd be very surprised if they actually got a first round pick for him.
I was such and you remember, I liked Fields so much I thought the Bears were a sleeper team to have a great season. So I've always liked the guy.
He's awesome.
If a team trades a first round pick for Fields, that GM should be fired on the spot because of the contract situation and because of what you said about what he has not shown yet at the NFL level.
Yeah.
That would be when some of these teams can use those picks to take JJ McCarthy or even some of the other second tier quarterbacks and get 4 guaranteed years and a 5th option. Why you would trade a first round pick for one and then a more expensive second year from a guy makes no sense to me. You said
to hear it about JJ McCarthy, he might go in the top 4.
Well, if you're Jim Harbaugh doing the interview, yes. But like, I mean, you said about what you said about Darnold is absolutely true. But how about what guys like Alex Smith and Jimmy Garoppolo were traded for?
Well, right. No, listen, that's the thing. The Darnold trade, just because it happened, it was a terrible trade.
And I know Smith was a lot older, but Garoppolo wasn't. Garoppolo might have been maybe 2 years older than Fields, 26 or 27 years old.
Do you think he's going to be a Steeler?
Gun to my head, no. But here's the problem with me answering the question that way. I'll go back to what I said in the middle of this conversation. Okay, then who are we picking him to play for?
Right.
Raiders, Broncos.
The Raiders make sense. They haven't been connected
to him at all, though. Sometimes they are sneaky mystery teams that get involved, but we haven't seen anything that suggests that that's going to happen. So,
all right, we'll do a little Super Bowl fallout. More First and Pod after this. All right, back in on First and Pod. 2 quick things, Poni, on the Super Bowl. Steve Wilks, the fall guy. Shanahan said it just wasn't the right fit. Terrible look for him, or do you get it?
Well, I get it, but okay. So I hate answering questions this way because I think it's such a cop-out. I do think in this situation, the way that you phrased it, I think both are actually right. I think that I get it, but I also don't think it makes Kyle Shanahan look good. They had the 3rd-rated defense in the NFL this season. Okay. The Chiefs had 19 points at the end of regulation. Does not look good that they fired him. But if you've been listening to the show all year, we've talked about this. Right. There just seemed to be a philosophical difference between Wilks and Shanahan the entire season. He was moving out of the coach's box onto the sideline.
They were talking about their efforts in the playoff games.
Their effort in the playoffs. Shanahan early in the season flat out blamed Wilks for one of the games that they lost, just completely aired him out and blamed him for a game.
Didn't maximize Chase Young, got run on by the Packers, got run on by the Lions.
You mentioned this on our Super Bowl podcast. It was not just a horrible game by Romo. It was a typical Romo experience where he had moments of brilliance as a broadcaster, but then moments of complete idiocy where it's, how do you pay a guy like that $18 million a year? He said it. They wasted a timeout. Shanahan had to call a timeout because he hated the defense that Wilks was in. And then great camera work by CBS. They show both guys on the sideline. And Shanahan has the play sheet over his mouth, and you can just see the veins in his neck popping because he's livid. He's basically screaming about the defensive look that they had for a play.
Yeah, that cover zero play on the Mahomes run.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it was. Listen, people framed it like he got fired because of the Super Bowl. I think he was getting fired if they won the Super Bowl.
Probably. So one more thing on what you just said. I think it's interesting that they did not even give it the euphemistic, they mutually parted ways press release here.
Oh, but he had time on his contract. He was fired after 1 year.
I know. And that's maybe like from the contractual thing where he's still going to get paid not to work. Maybe
Yeah,
that's why it
exactly.
has
He's
to be.
like, no, you're going to have to fire me to pay me.
Right. But like it makes it, when you say fired, you make it sound like the guy did a crappy job and that's why you're getting rid of him and not, we just agreed to disagree.
I think Shanahan tried to soft pedal it where it was like when he said it's like, it just wasn't a good fit. Like that he didn't talk about the performance. He talked about the fit between him and Wilks. And here's the thing. I don't think he deserved to get fired, but there were enough things, and their season was supposed to end with hoisting the Lombardi trophy, and it didn't. And you said Tomlin runs the Steelers. Shanahan is on that level as a coach. Whether we like it, whether Wilks likes it or not, whether it looks good for public perception, he can take those arrows and no one is going to question it a week from now because, of course, Kyle Shanahan, if he doesn't get along with his defensive coordinator or they have a philosophical difference that he didn't think was going to happen upon interviewing, of course, Kyle Shanahan's going to win that power struggle.
By the way, it's interesting. It's interesting you bring up the Steelers because they're actually the precedent for what happened here. In Super Bowl 30, after they lost to the Cowboys, Bill Cowher fired his offensive coordinator, Ron Earhart, and actually replaced him with Chan Gailey, so this is not like something that's happening for the first time ever. I think some people might have kind of reported it that way. It obviously very rarely happens, but it has happened in the past.
Really good job opening, though. Like a crazy good coordinator opening to happen this late in the game.
There's I still think, and we do a lot of these shows. We did 2 shows a week, and a lot of crazy stuff comes out of my mouth. Like, I think at various points on this podcast this year, speaking of the Niners, I made predictions that Sam Darnold was going to replace Brock Purdy. So I clearly do not shoot 100% or bat 1,000. I picked against the Chiefs in every playoff game. So I'm saying
that qualifier out of the way. Go ahead.
I'm saying self-effacing things here because if you remember, even before the Super Bowl, I said when we were talking about the coaches, I made the point. I don't think Steve Wilks is safe, even though they're going to the Super Bowl. And Mike Vrabel, it would be a good spot for him to go to San Francisco and be their defensive coordinator for a year, because if he could get along with Shanahan, it would show that he's not this impossible to work with, really rough around the edges kind of, authoritarian type coach where it's my way or the highway and he can get along with others. And like you said, it is the best for defensive coaches. Spagnuolo's not going anywhere. How many other defensive coordinator jobs are better than this one that just became available?
I mean, probably none. You're replacing a guy who got fired with a ton of talent, and you get an all-pro safety back for week 1.
Yep.
And you don't have Chase Young. So that it's an incredible, but I think you're crazy. I think Brandon Staley makes a lot of sense.
That's the easy thing to do.
No, but he just did something that backfired. Most people hire people they know, and yes, that leads to Nepo babies, and it makes for bad hiring practices and discriminatory hiring practices and racial inequities and all of those things. But having said I'm not saying it's right, but if Kyle Shanahan feels like he has some egg on his face, and how could he not, he's going to hire his buddy. He's going to hire his buddy who's been a head coach, been a successful defensive coordinator, knows the system, and he knows that he can work with him. That's just, I sometimes think the most obvious, right? The most obvious answer is the correct one. I think Brandon Staley's going to go there. Tell people that I paid you for our bet.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I actually have to forward that money to Nick.
Okay. Because I don't care about that.
So your money just is part of a larger donation that's going to our friend Nick Wright. So thank you.
I paid you for the overtime thing. I still think that I shouldn't have had to pay the full amount, but that's okay.
Why?
Well,
the defensive thing never even came out of his mouth, and he didn't even allude to it in a way that you could make you.
you made it seem, you're right, which is why I paid you. But he knew what he was doing. He wasn't like confused at the rule. Some of his players were, but he knew what he was doing. That mic'd up segment, and by the way, inside the NFL, not having a host and not being on HBO or Showtime has lost some of the luster in terms of like the media space, but they haven't lost anything in terms of the quality of the access that they get from NFL films.
You know what? I'm actually happy that you brought that up. As a quick aside, I think that show is an excellent show, and it's actually gotten even better now that they just got rid of like some of the stuffy people that used to host it. And it's Ryan Clark, Jay Cutler, Chad Ochocinco, and Channing Crowder, who's got an opinion on everything. I am stunned that show with that collection of people, with the NFL Films audio that they get, that does not have a bigger platform.
How is it on the CW?
And I don't even know what time it's on. I only see the clips on social media. And by the way, off of that, come on. They don't have the Kelsey audio from Andy Reid. What are they doing?
Oh, I know. I know.
Kelsey's mic'd up with Taylor Swift after the game. They don't want us to hear that.
He was mic'd up. He was a part of the overtime kickoff thing.
That's what I mean. Something got said there that they don't want us to hear. I don't know what it is.
They think it's going to Kelsey. He was cursing.
They think him. Not just cursing. I'm not saying he said like something that's like beyond the pale, but I think it's just the rage that went into it. The way I bet they feel like the way that it sounds is going to make him look really, really bad, and they don't want that out there. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree completely. It was so cool though to have that moment, to have Shanahan tell Fred Warner, "We want the ball," to have Mahomes and Reed reiterating it, to have them run out there, to see Mahomes be surprised.
His facial expression was awesome. We didn't really get that on the game broadcast.
Right. By Warner taking the ball, he's clearly surprised, running back. They want the ball. They wanted the ball. Having Dave Tobe tell his special teams unit, this is what we wanted if we would have won the toss, like on the kick part of it. Juszczyk saying, "Hey, did you know if we score a touchdown, it's not over?" It was incredible. And I keep going back to like, we have it. We have the technology. We have the access. And if people are NASCAR fans or F1 fans, and I am neither, but you can, during the race, they listen in to the driver talking to the crew pit. Occasionally, a golfer will give permission to listen in to the golfer and the caddy talking about the shot. And it's not just picked up by the boom mic, or a golfer will put in AirPods.
Yeah, I've seen
as they're walking up to their shot, they'll talk about their drive and they'll talk about what their approach is going to be. Like, we're so close. We're so close to being breaking through and realizing. We've seen baseball players turn double plays while talking to the broadcast, make diving catches in the outfield while being interviewed. These guys are so good at their job that we can take the broadcast to the next level. CBS should have had some of that. Like in 10 years, the Super Bowl broadcast, that exact same thing happens. We will hear from the parties during the broadcast. I guarantee it. It's too good. It's too good. They've got to figure out a way to get the people on board. Have the players opt in. You don't have to do it. It's not mandatory, but if you want to do it, you'll be promoted on our social media channels. It'll help grow your personality. We will not air curse words. We will not give away proprietary things, but we are going to push the envelope on access to tell the best story for our audience. It's an entertainment product.
Yeah, I just feel like the coaches and players will be so adamant against that because they won't want what will then be the immediate reaction after the game where they're getting questioned about what they said by reporters and things like that. Like that, there's, now in the locker room, hey, we saw you on CBS and this is what you said about your decision and, expand on that. I don't know. I feel like the reason why I bring that up is because like the quarterbacks wouldn't even do the Peyton Manning thing this year.
I know.
And that was
football might be the last one to do it, but every baseball team should have it for this year. Every single one. The first baseman at a minimum, someone on the bench, a funny third base coach, an outfielder. You should be able to, you should have AirPods in while you're playing, and the broadcast should be able to buzz you. And if you don't want to say yes, you don't have to, but you can buzz back and say, yeah, sure, you can talk to me. And you'll grow your personality and you'll get marketed. It should happen in all sports telecasts if the players want to do it.
The AirPods thing would be tough for me because I don't know what it is with my ears, but the AirPods don't stay in.
Dude, so I've lost my third pair of AirPods right now. Steph is so pissed at me because I just lose them and then I buy a new pair.
Would have been a nice Valentine's Day present from her.
It would have been, but she said, I will never buy you another pair of AirPods, even though our money is all in one pot. So I have to buy my fourth pair of AirPods here coming up. It's very upsetting. It's very upsetting. All right, welcome back to First and Pod. Danny Parkins, Andrew Fillipponi. Subscribe, rate, review. Give us a 5-star review. We'll be doing this once a week in the off season. I don't want to monologue for too long, Poni, and I'm not going to pretend like I'm going to say something that's so profound that hasn't been said elsewhere or hasn't been said in the literally hundreds of these tragedies that we've covered before in sports or otherwise. But it's really depressing that my guess is everybody who's listening to this has either been on the receiving end or sending end of a wellness check text because of a mass shooting. Because I have been now on both. I've been on the receiving end when the Highland Park 4th of July mass shooting happened. That's a couple of suburbs north of where I live. And I was at a 4th of July parade with Owen that was happening at the same time, just one suburb over. But how the suburbs work up here is people they're all, they're 5-minute drives between them. So like my town of Wilmette doesn't have one. So you go to the one in Winnetka or Highland Park. I happen to go to the one in Winnetka. The shooting happened at Highland Park, but everybody in these 5 or 6 suburbs goes to one of these 4th of July parades. Happened to be at the one where it wasn't, but it was at the exact same time. My grandparents lived at Village Shalom in Kansas City. There was a hate crime mass shooting there targeting elderly Jewish people. Had to make that call to be sure that my grandparents weren't involved. And then here, having worked and lived there for so long, Steph's mom was at the parade. My good friend and former producer and childhood friend, Ben Heisler, was at the parade with his 5-year-old son. And of course, Nick was at the parade with his wife, Danielle, who I've known since they were dating, and her sister, Deanna, and her best friend, Nicole. So the show starts and you see it happen on social media and you're sending these texts to these people. And it's crazy, man. It's crazy that nothing changes. And I don't think that one law or one thing or 6 laws or 6 things could eliminate it. But it's so insane that we've just stopped trying to do anything. And now I am monologuing. But I also looked this up because someone texted it into the show. That was the anniversary, the 16-year anniversary of a shooting at Northern Illinois University. And it was the 7-year anniversary of the shooting in Parkland. So just on that day, February 14th, in American history, you have 3 famous mass shootings. It's just, how could anyone look at the problem and be like, yeah, you know what? Let's not try anything. It's so depressing and scary because it makes you not want to be in large gatherings. It's terrible, man.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that crossed my mind, actually, I was sitting down for dinner with Amanda that night, and she actually, you know, when you experience this, sometimes when you're a parent of a young child, you know, you might lose track of what's happening on social media or what's happening in the news for like a 5 or 6 hour period because you're just overwhelmed with
Yeah, of course.
parental responsibilities. And so I was shocked when I got home. Now I guess I shouldn't say shocked because I had not gotten a message from her. But when I got home from work that night, I said to her, "Did you see what happened in Kansas City today?" And she was mortified when I told her, but she had not heard about it at all. And immediately started asking about like Nick and Danielle and everything. And so as we talked about this over dinner, one of the things she brought up to me was, you know, you just brought up the large gathering point. Like, are there still going to be parades after teams win championships, or like
I mean, my answer to that would be yes.
Yes, right. Because it's like you don't want one horrible incident to ruin what is a joyous celebration and everything else. But
And there have been shootings at other championship parades.
I know, but that's going to be something that a lot of people think about when they're making a decision if they want to attend something like this, at least in the immediate future, when it shouldn't even be a question that pops into our heads at all.
Yeah.
You know, like a team's going to win an NBA championship in June. There's going to be a fan, or there's going to be a father and mother of kids who think to themselves, well, wait a minute, we know what happened in Kansas City. And the other thing about that too, that like, I couldn't stop thinking about as I was watching the horrifying pictures from the parade site was, think about if you're, first of all, you know, you're thanking your lucky stars if you were there with your kids that nothing bad happened to them. But that's still psychologically a scarring experience. You're in this mass gathering for a party and you hear gunshots go off and you have to run and seek shelter and seek safety in those things. And like, now there's so many young people in Kansas City who were there that might have PTSD or might have some real strong negative feeling or emotion that's triggered by the Chiefs championship. Like, that's what I keep thinking about. Like, there might be some Kansas City 10-year-old version of me as a kid when I was obsessed with football. And if I was a Chiefs fan and lived close by, I would have been begging my parents to let me play hooky from school and go to that. And
I mean, a lot of the school districts were closed. They were calling it a red snow day.
Yeah. Like,
that's, yeah. So, I mean, the city and the surrounding area, I mean, completely shuts down for these things.
It's just, it breaks my heart in so many ways because, like, one of the things that I like about sports, and this isn't often true. I mean, we obviously lived through some times in the not so distant past where there were things about sports that divided people and made it, you know, polarizing and divisive and everything else. But it's really supposed to be something that brings people together in a positive way. Like, this game that the Chiefs won to set up this parade brought more people in front of their TVs than anything ever. Like, it's supposed to be a unifier, Danny. You know, and that's what like sickens me about this.
Well, the other thing too is, like, there are acts of heroism there, right? There are people that
the video of the guy tackling the shooter, for one.
Right. Yeah, right. Exactly. There are people who notified law enforcement. There are people who tackled the shooter.
Your guy Nick Allegretti, who took time to be with like kids who were distraught over the whole thing. I mean,
right.
what a stand-up dude.
Trey Smith did, apparently. Blaine Gabbert did. Andy Reid did. Jackson Mahomes got credit for that in one witness account. So I mean, Kansas City is an incredibly philanthropic place. I know that the blood donation banks were, the lines were out the door there for people trying to donate blood. So there's always the yin to the yang, like a ton of positive that comes out of it. And I know that it's become like in vogue because our industry went like too hard probably into politics when we're like the toy department and people are supposed to use us as a diversion. But I also think that like we can't become we can't become so jaded and numbed and desensitized to it that we just say, well, it's going to happen. Like, and I know you don't mean it, but like, because we talked about it on the show too. Someone said like, are they going to have to put metal detectors at parades? That just seems so ridiculous to like talk about banning parades. I know you're not saying banning parades, but kind of, right? Let's change the rules around parades instead of trying to do more things to get to the root issue here.
You're saying it's like a treat the symptoms.
It's just very frustrating. Like, you can't. All it would take was a good guy with a gun. There were 1,000 armed members of law enforcement there. Yeah. It's happened it happens in red states and blue states and cities and rural and churches and temples and mosques and elementary schools and preschools and colleges and high schools and theaters and malls and parades. And it's so American. It's so ingrained in American culture that, and people get so like, well, what about inner city violence? And what about this? And what about mental health? You want to have a conversation about all of the things that lead to inner city violence? Trust me, I'm here for it. You want to have a conversation about mental health? Trust me, I'm here for it. Pay enough to therapists. But like, also, this problem, the mass shooting problem, uniquely American. And it is the thing that like makes you say, Cubs game's at 1:20. At 12:45, there's 10,000 people outside of one gate trying to get in. You don't have to go through a metal detector there. And there's a bunch of buildings around, ballpark in a neighborhood. You're pretty at risk. You're pretty exposed. There's no way to stop that. There's no way to defend it if a bad actor wants to, so like, maybe we should actually look at figuring out the thing. And I'll say it, obviously, guns. And it's so insane that we've become so used to it that people would rather just be like, nah, let's just consider not going to parades, or let's arm teachers, or let's put metal detectors at movie theaters. You know what I mean? Like, that's just so insane to me, because you can't make every place in the world safe, but maybe we could do something about making it a little tougher for people to get killing machines in their hands.
I think what happens here, as far as like people that do what we do, is, we obviously relish like the disagreement in debate that comes with like discussing things like what we started the show with, like the Justin Fields thing. And, you post a strong opinion on Fields, or you say something strong about it, and you get people that will call you names and disagree with you on it. But in those situations, like, it never feels to me like like what's supposed to be an inclusive conversation where you feel like you're trying to bring in as many people as you can and invite and accept as many as many people as you can to talk about the things you find interesting. Like, people will disagree with you and call you names, but it never really feels to me like when that happens, like you're losing the people as like listeners or friends of the show or whatever, because you're just disagreeing about sports. And I think, to go back to what you said about how people aren't comfortable anymore talking about these things, is because I think people learned a few years ago, like, when you do that and people don't agree with you, they'll shut you off. And I think that's the fear and concern that people have in our space for having the types of conversations that probably, definitely things like this should promote. It's just like, you post something that you think is not a controversial or political comment. It's more of like a human rights issue. At least that's what you think it is. You say that, and the feedback you get is like something that doesn't match that. And I think that like, for a lot of people that do what we do, it just creates, I think, this reaction where it's like, you know what, it's not worth it.
Yeah, no, and that's right. You're right. That's what happened. And by the way, there's a real argument to be made that, hey, this is a business. This is what pays my mortgage and puts food on the table for my kids and will pay for their education. That I'm either preaching to the choir and living in an echo chamber, and so then what's the point? Or I'm turning people off because no one ever changes their mind about any issue like this. So then what's the point? For sure. But I also, not saying anything doesn't feel great either.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I'll say in closing here that, like, I think you mentioned, and I don't want to distract from or even take away from like anything else that you said in the middle of, and I thought it was good that you were very personal on this, because it has affected you a lot. And we're both pretty open book about this. I know that you have gone through a lot and you've seen mental health specialists and therapists. We've both gone through tragedies. Even if I hadn't gone through some of those depression inducing moments in my life, I still would advocate for mental health, wellness, and doing those things and finding people to talk to and support groups and stuff like that. Because, like, knowing my personality and some of the things that have happened in my life, like, I would not be here right now doing this with you if not for those people. So, like, I don't know. There used to be a stigma about this. We used to watch Sopranos together. That was the whole basis for that show,
Yeah, no,
it's just interesting that, like, you and I both really bonded over watching that when we were in college together. And, like, fast forward 10 years in my life, and I'm in a therapist chair, and it's like a dire situation for me, so.
Yeah, man.
Don't be afraid to reach out and get help, I guess, is the bottom line here for me.
It's a good way to end it. Thank you to Spencer Ray, our producer. He's Andrew Fillipponi. I'm Danny Parkins. Tell a friend about us. Let's keep this thing growing in the off season. First and Pod. Peace.